Hello all, this is Dr. Dave Maslak talking to you about reciprocity.com. The E is written with a 3, and in this particular video, I'm going to talk to you about what are some different types of research manuscripts. So if you don't know me, I'm a associate professor of innovation strategy and entrepreneurship, and I created this whole reciprocity project to give back as much as I possibly can. There were so many people that helped me out that I wanted to pay the favor forward and help you out. All right, so there's lots of different types of sort of basic styles of research manuscripts that all academics write. And I would say that this is probably pretty uniform across the academic fields. And these are sort of and I'm going to sort of point out the articles in order of basically the amount of citations that they get. Now, I know that there's going to be sort of variances between them, and this is just basically on my own personal, feel and stuff like that. I've never seen any sort of article that have shown this, but it's basic common sense in terms of what sort of citations they get in terms of how you think about what you should write going forward. All right, so the first one is case studies. Or some discovery of some sort of unusual artifact. It might be a presentation of some sort of data, but it is looking at a particular phenomenon and just saying that this is kind of a curious thing that you're looking at, right? So, it might be in, surgery, for example, and you find some sort of weird artifact with somebody that you're like, I've never seen that before. I'm going to write that up and write a little case study about that. It might be about a particular company. It might be about a particular individual. Maybe it's in psychology and you run across something that is just kind of unusual, and then you just write that up and you try to send it to a journal. Now, the problem with most case studies, and this is just like the one-off case study, unless you do it extremely well, where you're just looking at one particular thing and you're taking a really deep dive, and you're spending a tremendous amount of time sort of exploring what's going on and looking at the nitty gritty within the particular thing that you're looking at. They just don't get cited nearly as much. However, you do see original research that is just like stellar, that that are case studies in the sense that they are only looking at one particular firm, for example, or one particular thing, but they take a tremendous amount of effort and in depth in terms of looking at the particular mechanism that they are looking at, right? So it's usually going into something that's unusual and really interesting, but no, there's not a lot of research about that thing. But then they're just taking a real deep dive and just really focusing on that thing. If it's a case study, just to simply say, this is an interesting thing, that's not really going to fly too much in terms of the citations that you're going to get. But if you go into it and you explore the mechanism, you take a really rich, deep dive into what's going on, and you really uncover what's going on, those things, that sometimes really flies. And they could be some of the most cited articles around, because they are just really well done in sort of specifying a new mechanism in a new area. But those tend to be really difficult. And that's probably going to be along the lines of more of the third that I'm going to point out. So the second thing is editorial comments. So in a lot of journals, the editors will have a discussion about something that's kind of relevant in the research field. And they just kind of have like a discussion about things that they find interesting. It's usually the editors, the senior level editors, that are going to talk about that kind of stuff. And they might have a little bit of a soapbox where they just kind of discuss. Traditionally, not, from what I understand, it's not peer reviewed like the other ones. So they are just sort of presenting what's going on in the field. They're not necessarily, it's not peer-reviewed research, but it's just presenting some interesting things. Sometimes those get cited in the sense that they will be discussed in a course, right? In doctoral courses, you might talk about what is sort of current state of the art. But, in general, they're more of a commentary about what's going on. The third thing is the original research. This is the things that you think about in terms of doing research. And, the science fair project thing that you would have done in fifth grade, for example, or fourth grade, where you are doing some sort of original research, right? Maybe you're doing a lab study, you are doing field studies, you're doing hypothesis testing, that's the traditional kind of stuff. You're going out to the field. And this is where the sort of case study, where you're doing the ethnography, for example, and taking a deep dive into something and spending a tremendous amount of time looking into it. that is probably along the lines more original research than just sort of a discovery of this kind of weird, unusual artifact that happens. So you're taking a real deep dive and trying to explore what is going on with the thing that you're looking at, right? And that is really the probably the most common article that you're going to see. It's the original research, and that's what people get known for a lot of times. Except for, all of them are really important, but the sort of corpus of science, the larger sort of base of science, is this original research that happens. Although the other ones are still equally important, and people do very well with all of them. So the fourth thing is, review studies, right? So this is your meta-analysis. So there's kind of two different kinds of styles of review articles that happen. There is kind of like the theoretical review articles. I don't know what else to call them, but basically like the theoretical review articles where somebody just understands the area really well, and they kind of give a discussion, sort of a view of where the literature is heading, and then they offer propositions or hypothesis. Usually they're called propositions at that stage because they're not tested. So they're just like, well, here are some insights, here are some ideas and how we think that the world might work. And then we just kind of offer it up to somebody else to study that particular thing, right? So these review articles, that's kind of the theoretical review article. And then there's the meta-analysis, so the systematic review. I've heard them called both, and probably some people would argue that meta-analysis are different than systematic review. But basically, it's a real deep dive where you're doing kind of like statistics on previous research, and you're really looking at what all the other stuff that has been published in a particular phenomenon, and then you look to see at whether an effect exists on looking at that particular phenomenon, right? So there's a tremendous amount of research that goes on into this, and it's pretty quantitative. And so because it's quantitative, there tends to be a little bit more of a bias in the systematic reviews, meta-analysis towards quantitative stuff, because it's hard to measure the qualitative stuff. But they're all equally important, right? And you have to sort of make an educated guess or a discussion about that sort of qualitative stuff as well. But anyways, those are the kind of review articles that you get. Those tend to be highly crazy cited because they're summarizing all this different research. And then, a young budding scholar that doesn't want to do a tremendous amount of research in a particular area, they'll just look at the systematic review or the meta-analysis or the theoretical review or whatever it is you're going to say that has all of these articles, and they kind of define the field. You just go and you sort of look at those, and you gather citations from that article, and then you also cite that article, right? So they tend to be crazy cited, and people make great careers by doing that kind of stuff, by doing meta-analysis. Now there's new ways that are always kind of evolving, and new types of research that are always evolving, which is really cool. And in this current environment of science, we're going through kind of a renaissance. We're always going through a renaissance with science and discovery. It's always continuously evolving rapidly. But there's, themes that are happening right now in terms of looking at new ways of doing research. Simply because the current ways, there's been sort of recognition that they're not as good as we would like them to be, and so people are always proposing new things. So the first thing is replication studies. This is where you just go and replicate previous results, and you do this in a really rigorous way, where you just look what other people have done, and that is simply because nobody else was doing that before, which is kind of weird because it was based on the philosophy of science is really about replication and doing things really well, a central part of that, but nobody ever did it, which was really strange. And then we've recognized that, oh crap, we have to replicate these kind of things. But so they're well done. Typically at this moment, and I don't think this is like, surprising in any sort of way, but I think that they're really difficult to get published with just a plain old replication study. You have to do things that are novel and different and unique. As well as replicating what you've done. And that the bar tends to be pretty high if you're doing that, right? So, or it might be sort of a contentious area, and you sort of replicate, several different things in that particular area to see whether those results hold up. And the bar tends to be pretty high in terms of what the expectation is with those, as with all articles that are really good. Another one that I think is really cool, and I hope this kind of picks up in all areas, is registered reports of some sort. Right. So this is where you, and I might be sort of doing a really poor job of explaining this. Basically, this is where you sort of propose a study and you send it off to the editors or the journal. And then the journal and the editors and the reviewers, they say, oh, this is pretty cool. Let's do this. Let's sort of nail this into the ground, and you have to carry out this particular study, and then you get a rigorous test of that study, right? So it's carried out in a rigorous way. Not everybody's going to be able to do these registered reports because it's a lot of trust in the people that are carrying them out, for the editors to sort of trust what you're doing. So I suspect that there's going to be a bias towards people that are, doing things very rigorously, and they're tested really rigorously in the sort of in the proposal that you're doing. So, which is really cool, because now we're being really upfront, and it's not going to care whether all the results are not supported, right? We're just going to be like, well, whatever, the results aren't supportive, and then we just present them, which is actually a really good thing. That's a positive thing for a lot of different areas, right? So, but again, it's going to be like the replication studies are going to be, the standards are going to be really high. I hope it continues on, and other fields are sort of blowing up in terms of, accepting these kind of sort of alternative ways of doing science as they normally are done, because I think that they're really important to get just insights, and just having like a plethora of sort of ways of dealing with these kind of issues, because there's not one way of doing science. That's one thing that we should recognize. And I think if you talk to most editors, most sort of senior level researchers, they're going to say, you know what, there is many different ways of doing science, and the sort of knowledge that you get from each different way is going to be unique and different, and we're going to gather really interesting insights by doing that. And it is with this sort of plethora, or the many different things combining together, that we get sort of a robust understanding of what's going on, right? So it's kind of like this qualitative, quantitative sort of debate that we have in science. Qualitative stuff only kind of gets at the superficial level of what's really going on, and you can keep diving in, but you still can't get really at the mechanism. You can't really grasp on what's going on with the qualitative stuff. So just looking at numbers, right? As an engineer, that's hard for me to say, but you really just can't get at really what's going on. And so there's been a recognition in the last 20 years or so that the qualitative stuff is really important across all fields, right? So digging deep into the qualitative stuff and getting at the mechanism is really, really important, even though that, some people would be just kind of dismissive of that. But I think now it's well recognized. I don't know of a really good researcher that would discount qualitative at this moment, or doing this sort of really rigorous research where you're getting into the thick of things, right? So, doing the, is it Jane Goodall, right, of going on into, study apes and actually be with the apes. That's a really tough thing to do, and you're going to get crazy insights that nobody else is going to do. So if you can get into those environments where you're actually digging deep into something, you can't beat that, right? But in terms of the quantitative stuff, you're just going to be at the superficial level. You're always just going to be testing what we've already sort of known. With the quantitative stuff, it's kind of a weird thing, right? Because the only way that you get real discovery, real insight, and that's why the qualitative stuff is really important, or sort of the plethora of looking at many different areas is really important, is because you really need to get sort of a good understanding, a good grasp of what's going on before you can start getting discoveries, scientific discoveries. And so the bar, unfortunately, keeps going up and up and up. Science keeps getting more and more difficult. But that's a good thing in general, because that's making sure that we're doing the right jobs that we should be doing, right? Focusing on the idea and doing a good job of focusing on the idea rather than looking at, just sort of superficially. And each year, I could confidently say the research that's published today is a lot more rigorous than it was a decade ago, and it's even more rigorous than what it was 30 years ago, and it keeps sort of ratcheting up as we sort of progress, and that's positive. In general, totally positive. I know as researchers, as us, right, it's a pain in the butt, But in general, that's a good thing for science. So if you like this video, give me a thumbs up. Do subscribe to the YouTube channel. I try to put out all this kind of stuff and to help you out as much as I possibly can. All right, take care and have a wonderful day. Bye.